Okay. Okay, good morning. Welcome to Management Council. It's 8:30. Let's get started. On this Thursday, December 1st, call the meeting to order. Have a roll call, please.
Senator Driscoll,
Excused?
Senator Hicks,
Excused?
Senator Nethercott, Senator Rothfuss,
Here.
Representative Connolly, Representative Gray, Representative Greer, Representative Summers,
Here.
Speaker Barlow,
Present.
President Dockstader.
Here.
Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's get started. Do we have some minutes to go over and approve? Matt? Okay. All right, let's proceed then. Jump right into it. Number 2, state statutes contract. Director Obrecht?
Mr. Chairman, our contract to publish the statutes has expired. We issued an RFP this fall for proposals to publish our statutes. We had one respondent, LexisNexis, our current publisher, in fact, the only publisher we've had in the history of the state of Wyoming. And Tanya can walk you through what their proposal was.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Mr. President, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office Operations Administrator. As Mr. Obrecht explained, the contract expired on July 1st of 2022. And our office released an RFP on October 3rd, and responses were due. I'm going to switch to a different mic.
Whatever's best for you.
Okay, hopefully this is better. As the Director Obrecht explained it, there was one respondent, LexisNexis. Unfortunately, in the past, Lexis has offered complimentary statute sets to our office and the statutorily required 400, in excess of 400 statutes. But in this instance, in their response, they've declined to offer that service. Luckily, Director Obrecht included a line item in the budget to offset that, but in light of that, we will have to pay for the 440 statutory sets that are printed. They will continue to offer complimentary online access to the public with the annotations, as well as an electronic copy that our office utilizes for purposes of publishing folio. And 20 licenses to their online legal research service as well. I'm not going to walk through all the details of the RFP or their response. Those are kind of the highlights. The contract allows for 4 extensions of 2 years, and the price increase on the statutes, the printing of the statutes, the annotated version, as well as the supplement, is limited to the BLS price index for professional publishing. There's a specific price index for that specific service, and any increase in the extensions cannot exceed that amount. I guess the last thing I would note is that the publication, because this involves publication, does require the approval of the governor and the treasurer.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the part where they provided free or something and now it's more, when I looked at the proposal, they were talking about 23% lower than the current cycle. So that conflicts with what I thought I just heard you say. So thank you.
Tanya?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, good catch. So the price that they provided in their contract previously was actually $570 for the supplement and the printed statutes. But they're giving us a very discounted rate of $440 for both to print it. We didn't actually have to pay the $570 previously. It was complimentary to the state of Wyoming, basically for access to our work.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just point out at this point in time too, that we've seen price pressures on all our printing contracts, incredible price pressures. And then Lexus is also getting hit with another, disruption to their business model from a Supreme Court ruling that deals with the ability for them to copyright annotations to state statutes. Now, how that will play out in the long run, we're not 100% sure yet, but that may have gone into their decision also to charge us for the statute sets this time.
Thank you. And you mentioned 4 extensions, that's traditional?
Mr. Chairman, the last extension offered 3 two-year extensions, so this would authorize an additional extension, 8 years total, 10 years for the entire contract term.
Price increases roughly, what's the percentage? What are we seeing here?
Well, Mr. Chairman, in the past, we haven't had a cost associated with this contract. It's been completely complimentary, and Lexus has sort of made up the ground by having people purchase the books outside of the 440 sets that they give us complimentary. But I think in part because our office has the link on our website that has public access, free public access to the annotated statutes, their level of subscription for the printed books has gone down drastically. And as a result, they're now charging the state of Wyoming for printing them.
Okay, go ahead. Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Tanya, thank you. So 400 copies, maybe you went through this the last time, but do we need to print 400 copies? In other words, can we make some of these entities pay their own way?
Daniel?
Ultimately, it's the state of Wyoming, probably a lot of it.
Daniel?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, there's a statutory list in statute that designates the county clerks, various libraries, the judges. I can't remember the entire list off of the top of my head. I'm happy to send that to you after this meeting, but our office did audit that list. We both Heather Cameraman and Ashley Phillips worked on that project. And in addition, we sent out a survey to our staff and asked, who's comfortable in utilizing electronic copies rather than paper. And we actually had, over 10 people commit to just using the electronic copy that's available online.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So it's statutory that we provide these to these entities, period.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman, Representative Summers, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions regarding the contract, I think at this point, a motion might be appropriate if you would authorize us to go ahead and execute this contract. I would note, Lexus has not seen this contract. We haven't given them a copy of it. We wanted your authorization prior to doing that. And so it's possible they'll have some minor changes to the language, but.
Want that in a formal motion then? Second? Second? Okay, Summers, Connolly, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion passed. Go ahead, anything else on this? Okay. we're
Mr.
good.
President, real
Go ahead.
briefly,
Senator?
thank you. Can the Director Obrecht briefly explain, will there be annotations in future statute books?
Go ahead.
Yep. Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercutt, there will be annotations. Yes, yep. But yes, there won't be any change, and Lexus will still do those for us. In fact, that Supreme Court case, it was an interesting fact pattern because it was based from the state of Georgia. Lexus was their printer, and but the state of Georgia played a huge role on the annotations that they were including with their statutes. I mean, they had a committee legislative staff and legislators directing what the annotation said. So the Supreme Court said, you can't copyright that. It's copywriting a public work. It would be like copywriting a judicial opinion. And, you know, that's not the case in Wyoming. We don't have anything to do with the annotations at all. Now, we'll correct them if we find an error in the annotations, or if we think things need to be added to it, we'll let Lexis know. But, so, yeah, so they will continue to provide annotations.
Thanks. Follow-up needed? Nope, okay. Go ahead, Trustee Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just, you know, and as I looked at today's agenda, and I looked at the rules, and I think maybe I asked that question last time, but as I look at this, how much time do you think you spend on this? I mean, just this piece alone, you know, ensuring that the annotations are correct and the statutes are correct, is it a significant time suck? And how does it compare to, for example, like to managing the rules?
Either one of you.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I mean, that is the primary job of our bill processing center after the session. That's what they do, is work with Lexis to make sure the changes are properly incorporated. Also, our IT is involved with that to make sure that our online version of the statutes are updated correctly. It's a big time commitment for us. And it's, you know, it's actually a statutory duty of the Legislative Service Office, so.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Move on to stationery. Director Obrecht?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take this one. From your last meeting, recall that you authorized us to go ahead and modify Management Council Policy 0302. It's included in your meeting material. If you recall, I guess during the 2022 session, our printer went out of business and we had to go out for bid twice, actually. And to Director Obrecht's point, the cost of printing now for color letterhead is in excess of 10 times what we had been paying previously. We discussed this at the last Management Council meeting, and you voted to go ahead and authorize modification of the policy as you see, and we've incorporated those changes. And so I'll just hit the highlights. And in subsection 1, it now requires that the legislator make a request for full color stationery and correspondence cards. However, business cards will continue to be provided automatically. And then it continues to authorize leadership to have access to an additional 250 sheets of stationery as well as 500 business cards. And then the remainder of the changes in the document really are just sort of updating language to reflect, you know, more current practice of LSO. And the replacement of item number 3 is actually just moving up item number 7. Because it's more prevalent that we really need legislators to be utilizing their online templates, their templates that will be loaded to their computers as opposed to the full color letterhead.
Thank you. Committee, you got the material in front of you? Policy? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The change from having the assignments to the chairmanships of the committees, what's the background on that? You know, it's kind of a separate issue, I think, right?
Can you?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So when this policy was first drafted back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we used to actually put, well, I wasn't here, but when they were created, would actually put everybody's committee assignments on there as well. So not only if you were a chairman, but also if you were a member. The Management Council authorized us probably at least a decade ago to just do chairmanship and not what committees you were on, because it was becoming such a heavy lift every 2 years to print everybody new business cards and letterhead, because committee assignments obviously change. So it just mainly is putting with a practice that we've been doing for at least the last 10 years into the policy.
Okay, Co-Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's actually to the same issue, and on in item number 4 on the first page, it talks about committee chairmanships. And then on item number 6, it talks about permanent statutory committees chairmanship. So there actually aren't that many statutory committees. Many of our committees are actually rule-based committees, i.e. the 10 standing committees. And so I think we ought to either strike statutory or something there, because it's a small thing, but they will conflict with each other for that, it looks to me like. So I guess my suggestion is, if you take a look at that as we continue this conversation, and see if statutory doesn't need to be stricken.
You want to make that in a form of motion?
Well, I'd like some feedback from the director first before we do that, just so we're talking about all committees, not just statutory ones.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we think that you could strike everything after, you could strike permanent statutory committees. So it would read only standing committee chairmanships, so you'd strike of as well, the new of, and management council will be listed on the stationery and business cards. So only standing committee chairmanships and management council will be listed on the stationery and business cards.
Okay, committee, you got this, number 6? Follow up from the committee?
So I would move to,
Co-chair?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'll just move to strike lines on number 6, everything from of through the rest of that line. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Well, we can, yeah.
I don't care.
premature, okay. All right, any follow-up on this?
Well, just one other, Mr. Chairman. What we probably need to include is only standing committee chairmanships, management audit committee, and management council will be listed on the stationery. Because management audit's not a standing committee, but it is a
Would you-
statutory committee.
Would you repeat that for me, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it should read only standing committee chairmanships, comma, management audit committee and management council will be listed on the stationery and business cards.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman?
We got 2, let's go, Senator Nethercott, and then co-chair. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it might be best to just have stationery with the person's name, address, contact information, and whether or not they're in the Senate or the House, and that's it.
Co-chair?
And they can add on their signature lines when they type their letter. All of those very important things. And I don't know about you, but I have not gone through 250 business cards.
I've gone through close to that many.
Although I have changed committee assignments and chairmanships, and will proceed to do so again moving forward, it's making a lot of it moot, redundant, and probably unnecessary. That's big and garbage.
Okay, co-chair?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So certainly an interesting point brought by our Senate colleague. I think actually the easier fix to the expansive chairmanship thing is to strike standing, so that only committee chairmanships and management council are listed. And then that includes management audit, it includes tribal relations, it includes all the other committees that are statutory as well, if they so choose. Does not get to the point that this Senator Nethercott brought, but I think that gets to not adding in all those other management audit, et cetera.
So at this point, you're saying with just the committee chairs, others mentioned, yeah, period. Any follow-up to either comment? All right. Okay, we're back to the matter, Tanya? Nope. Okay, first we got to adopt the policy.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the changes to Management Council Policy 03-02.
Okay, second? Move to second, and all those in favor say aye.
No, there's gotta be an amendment.
I would like to make an amendment, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. President, I'd like to amend number 6, strike standing, strike of permanent statutory committees.
Second.
Moving second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Passed. Okay, back on the policy then. Motion to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against, nay. Policy accepted with those changes.
Chair, quick question.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious from staff, how much do you think this will save us, if anything?
That's how many requests you get.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, I don't know off the top of my head. What I will say is we are working through this process right now, and not everybody is electing to take letterhead and envelopes. So, I mean, it is going to be a reduction for sure. I don't know how much at this point.
Anthony, what's the rough number of those who would refuse letterhead?
I would say right now it's probably about half and half.
Okay, interesting.
And that includes new members, chairman, and leadership.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, if all members were to elect as the policy was previously written in our previous memo, the total would have been roughly $30,000. And just 2 years ago, to provide for the same service, it was $6,800. Now, it was a lot smaller class, so of course, you know, that plays into it, but the cost of letterhead is 10 times as much as what we paid 2 years ago.
Okay. Okay. All right, anything else on this one? Let's move forward then. Okay. Research request confidentiality, Director Obrecht?
Mr. Chairman, Lily's going to come up and discuss this with you, but since she's taken over in the research and program evaluation section.
Everybody familiar with this? Okay. Lily, it's all yours. You get the microphone that works.
Go for it.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. Since I have been the interim director of program evaluation, of program research and evaluation, what I have discovered, and which you all know because you've been here a lot longer than I have, is that the products that our division or our section prepare are really important and valuable products. And what we do is we, as you recall, if a committee wants research or if a legislator wants in research, generally it's on comparisons of how a governmental function in Wyoming compares to other states, or how the law in Wyoming compares to other states. But it's also, for example, history. And one of the, well, I'll get to that in just a minute, but what I've found is that our folks spend sometimes up to 2 weeks or even more on certain projects, especially the big ones. So right now, the way our statutes and policy read is that all of these products are confidential unless, and this is just for the individual legislators. They're confidential unless the legislator opts to make them, or basically signs a disclosure form to make them public. Well, what we've found is that a lot of legislators just, they actually just forget to do it. They don't return the disclosure form. And maybe it is easier just to not disclose what the research that we've done is, but these products would be very, very beneficial, I think, to many legislators. And so what we just wanted you to consider is possibly changing the policy to provide that these research products are at least available to all legislators unless the legislator who requested it opts to make it confidential. And so, for example, and this is one of the projects that really made us think about this, is a recent project that we completed that took a substantial amount of time, was Wyoming Community College and the University of Wyoming enrollment, tuition, staffing, capital construction, and budget information over the last 15 years. And when that was finally completed, it's actually really interesting. And so you could just opt to keep those all confidential, but unless the legislator specifically wants it, it just could be substantial benefit to everyone. So that's just something we wanted you to consider.
Thank you. Committee questions?
Mr. President?
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. And so what do you anticipate doing with the product? Would it be published, or how would other legislators know it's available?
Well, that's what that's one of the things that I think you'd want to consider. Right now, if it's published, we are in the process of putting those on our website up to the public. But if you don't want the public to get all of those, we could just put them on the internal legislator website.
Help me understand, what's the decision point for publishing? Help me
Is
understand.
whether or not the legislator specifically signed a disclosure form to say that we could be, and it says on the form, could this be disclosed to the public, or should it be disclosed to other legislators? And so we would just change it to be the opposite, that on the form, it would say, we would provide each legislator, when we give them the product, we would provide them the form that said, please keep this, or keep this confidential. So there's two decisions here, or if you want to move forward with this. One, do you want to make it an opt-out program, so you opt out of making it available to other legislators? And two is, if you do that, do you want us to put it on the public website, or on the your internal legislator website?
Understood. Thank you.
Mr. President?
Senator Nethercutt, follow up.
Yeah, Mr. President, it's kind of an interesting situation. I know what I have done, instead of asking for a big research project, recognizing that whatever question I'm asking or curious about, LSO has likely experienced before, or has some other piece of information that can be helpful, and that's all I really need, right? And so I'm essentially asking for the research project to be done, with the caveat that, do you already have this in the library? Assuming that I'm not the first to ask this question, and if so, can I have that? And so then the product is just turned over, and there's no need for the person who originally asked for that original research product to take place to agree to waive it, because I've created a new privilege with you by making that request, and essentially you did the research for me anyway, you just happen to have that work product available. So that's how I see it working from my perspective, and this issue isn't necessarily there. I would have hesitation about legislators asking LSO to do research projects for the website. And so maybe more discussion around that. I'm sure UW and the colleges in the example you gave may have different data or a different explanation of the data than how we presented it. And so I see concerns even with that particular project in mind. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Lily, before we go over here, do you want to respond to that, or you keep going?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think that's accurate, and that's a good comment. And so that's why you may, if you want to change this policy, you may want it to just put it on the internal legislative website. And part of the reason for that also is that when you have a lot of new legislators coming in, they don't realize that this research has been done. But I understand totally that thought. For example, the one on the Community College Commission and the University of Wyoming, Mr. Chairman, we did work with substantially for a lot. We got most of the information from the community colleges and the University of Wyoming. But you're absolutely right, Senator Nethercutt, that just as when we prepare information for committees, agencies may not agree with it, and then they haven't had an opportunity to come back and say, well, this is additional information we'd like to add.
Okay, thank you. Representative Connolly, did I hear you over here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification question. these requests for research, how do they relate to the requests for bill drafts and information regarding bill drafts, where we sign confidentiality agreements as well in that process? Are they similar? Are we talking about the same confidentiality or something else? And my mic is doing the same weird thing
Okay, we
too.
got Mike Gremlins this morning. Okay, go ahead, Lily.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, that's a great question. They, sometimes they don't relate to bill drafts at all. Sometimes it might be a new legislator just saying, coming in and saying, I don't know how this program works. Can you explain it to me? Or other times, it definitely, this research lots of times does relate to an idea that a legislator might have had for a bill draft. And for example, one of the other requests that has been disclosed recently is whether other state legislatures hire an actuary to evaluate state pension plans. And then how, if legislators that do have actuaries to evaluate state pension plans, how does that affect the, how does that relate to the, this, whether or not the pension plans, these pension plans are sufficiently funded? And so, and I think we have actually, when we talk about our next topic, I think the Management Council has considered that as is if, should LSO, should the legislature have an audit function? So you can see how a bill could possibly come out of these, this research. And I think this is historically why it has been confidential. It doesn't directly relate to a bill draft, and generally it doesn't include legal advice that you might get when you have a bill draft, a bill draft prepared. But I would say that, well, it is may or may not be a difference, but it's just that you have a perfect example is the one on the Community College Commission that took, and the University of Wyoming, that took several weeks of preparation, and it only goes, unless that legislator had not, if that legislator hadn't disclosed it, that person is the only person that gets, and it's literally this thick, and it is very interesting and important. So it's just a policy question that we wanted you to consider.
Representative Connolly, follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, this is honestly a fascinating kind of discussion. I'd like to see both of those reports, to tell you the truth. But I am curious about the number of reports that you think would become public. And then just my thought that putting it internally makes sense to me, but the reality is if something is internally available, it will become public. There's no two ways about it, right? At least that's my thought. You don't have 93 people look at something and say, oh, you have to keep this to yourself. That's not going to happen. The press is going to get it. So I'm curious about, again, the number of documents that you produce and your thoughts regarding the external versus external publication of them.
Lily?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, I actually looked yesterday, and over the last year, and actually maybe over the last 2 years, I believe there were, I would guess, but maybe 30 or more products, maybe even 40. And of those, I think only maybe at the most, and I'm just from looking quickly yesterday, maybe about 10 to 15% are actually made available to the public.
Thank you. Go ahead.
On that one. And do you think, and again, I would be one that doesn't sign those forms. I just don't do it. I forget, right? I'm bad. Is it because the requester really wanted it to be confidential, or they're just lazy like me? What do you think?
Chairman,
You're okay to answer that.
That's like, when did you stop beating your spouse? You're not lazy, but I would say most of them are just because the legislator did not return the disclosure form or call us back. And that's why, but again, so we would just change the policies to say, if you want it confidential, please tell us. And we could make it somehow so that we immediately notify the legislator of that. But again, it's totally policy, up to you.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is this a realistic problem or a theoretical one in that we have all of this information that is not published somewhere? But it certainly is available to legislators. Again, if someone is curious about that data or wants to know it, all they have to do is ask LSO and they will do one of two things: provide the information they already have or go get the information, right?
Lily?
So the information is not quote unquote confidential and never to be seen by a legislator who desires it.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. This is if a legislator knows that he or she has the ability to ask for such large products to be created, then they will do that. But what we find is there's probably actually just a handful of legislators usually that ask for these products. So I would say maybe even, I couldn't guess, but it's a small number of repeat customers that we have.
Ones who want to take the deeper dive, okay.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
in response to that, the rest of the legislators, I would say, generally know that there's a small handful of legislators that are consuming the majority of LSO's time. And in recognition of that overconsumption of resources, other legislators do withhold some of their requests, recognizing that LSO is overly burdened as it
Overwhelmed,
is.
yeah. You want to try to address that one?
Mr. Chairman, no, the only thing I would say is that, as you can see from just these two products, it's really interesting information. And and again, this is just came to, this is not new. We have considered, LSO has, and maybe Management Council too, has considered this, I would say, over the past 20 years on and off. And now you just have somebody new like me coming in and saying, each one of these two products, when they're finally completed, you realize how informative these products are, and that that if they only go to one legislator, it's a lot of work for one legislator that would benefit being transparent to the rest of the legislators. But I understand also exactly what you're saying. It may lead to a bill draft, there may be policies, there may be reasons that a legislator is planning to do something or bring something up during the session that they might not want everybody else to know.
Thank you. Further, Co-Chair?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'll I guess, give my confession. So I made a request for a bill and asked for an update on any changes on a particular issue. And I received an update and then two previous LSO research documents of past legislatures. I happened to have been serving with both of them, so I knew who they were, but their name was stricken. So, you know, it wasn't releasing a confidentiality of someone's previous request. And you get actually the confidentiality request when you make the request, not when you receive the report. And maybe that's one of the things we should actually flip, is we should actually say, here's the report, do you want it made public or not? Instead of saying, when you make the request, because this is certainly going to become public, because it's going to be part of my case when I present my bill. And so there's another way it gets released, is the legislator themselves release it without the form. I mean, without doing the form. So the second thing I would say is, leading into the next conversation that we're going to have, Mr. President, is management audit tasks some of the very same things. We do program white papers. We do these type of things too, and our staff has already uses some of this materials to help flesh some of those out. So my question is, and maybe this is not a question this management council is going to, maybe it's the incoming management council in a month from now, they can take this up in there as they go forward, is does management audit actually have a role in this to say, you know, after a certain amount of time, 2 years or whatever, this stuff just becomes public or whatever, so that there's a rolling cycle. Like I said, I got the report, I have it on my computer. It has two appendices that were research projects from now past legislators, actually one of them is past, as in deceased, and, you know, now they're in now they belong to me, and I'm gonna release them one way or the other, whether I just make copies and hand it out, or whether I do it formally. Anyway, so I think this is a discussion. I don't know if we can solve it today, but I think it's maybe for the next management council, those that will be on it, continue to have this conversation. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Mr. President, thank you. What I'm hearing the issue is that LSO has devoted a significant amount of time and resources to create a beautiful and informative product that sits on a shelf. And that is painful. And so is there any solutions to that we can come up with so that those individuals who worked so hard on that can be recognized and the information can be utilized to whomever may be interested, is really, I think, the issue we're trying to address here. I think we're walking down into very dangerous territory that requires more conversation concerning confidentiality, publishing documents, privilege, reports, and all those pieces. Those are different issues, certainly that are connected here, but I do think it needs to cook a little bit longer by the Management Council before any additional decisions on this topic are made.
Do you have a question?
So, Mr. President, and I appreciate that. Management audit and the director, and now Ms. Sharp and previously Ms. Bodewins, our staff would have to allocate their time for whether they're doing a program evaluation and how many requests were coming in from committees, et cetera. So really personal requests, individual legislative requests, at least this is my understanding, were the lowest of the priorities. There was committees, standing committee, you know, management audit, evaluation, standing committees, you know, and then so right, the reason they got this report done is because there must have been a lull and they had staff member available. Management audit had finished their work, or, you know, whatever. So not everybody gets probably their full request taken care of in a timely manner because of workload, to your point, to workload. When it takes 2 weeks for one staff or two staff members to turn out a really good report, you know, we would hope that it's valuable to other people too. So, thank you, Mr.
Lily,
Chairman.
do you want to address? Oh, let's go to Representative Connolly first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what's interesting to me thinking about this notion of confidentiality, there's no confidentiality in telling us that you just did these extensive reports, which now I want, right? So the subject matter isn't confidential. Is that true? Clearly it isn't, or else you couldn't have told us what it is. But here's my next question regarding that. What if I asked you right now for the exact same subject matter?
Lily?
What would you do?
Mr. Chairman, I think there are two questions there. The subject matter on these two reports, these two reports had disclosures. And so that's why we did that. And then the second is if you asked for the exact same thing, we would go back in and look at the report, update it, and make sure we took out anything that might indicate who had requested it before. And, or we could have, help me, Matt, we could have asked the first legislator if we could release it. Is that correct?
Matt? Okay,
Yep.
go ahead.
can do that.
Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I really don't have a problem with what you're suggesting. I think probably in the end, it's a good idea. I think you need to have a process where actually, yes, you say, you know, please keep it secret, but then actually a process on the other end where if nobody's answered before you release it, you send out an email back to the person that requested it going, hey, this is gonna go live unless you know, just a backside, because I've done research for specific bills, and if I didn't like the outcome of the research and I went on with the bill, I really didn't want that released, you know, because it didn't make the case for my bill. And that's just the way research is when you're researching a bill. And so I think we need to have a process where there's a check. And I was trying to think, well, is there anything nefarious that could go on where, you know, legislators could ask for research, you know, just to release to the public? They can do that anyway, right? We can ask for a piece of research take it right over, release it to whoever we want to release it to. So really, that process is available anyway. So I don't see the downside in doing this, as long as we have some checks and balances in the system to make sure people, because we're all busy and we forget things, and just a reminder notice that, hey, this goes public if you don't respond.
Okay. Wally, did you have?
And, sorry, I
either
guess,
One of you? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just so we can clarify, the only thing we're talking about right now is research done by the research division. So anything done by legal or by budget fiscal, you would still, that would be confidential unless that legislator specifically waived that confidentiality. We're just talking about pure research products that Lily's group does. And even that, I think, this discussion is worthwhile on what level of confidentiality it should have and what should be the checks and balances if they're to be released.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. And so, Mr. President, Director Obrecht, does privilege and confidentiality attach to the research division's products that they produce at the request of legislators?
Lily? Director?
Yeah, Lily and I both know this one, yeah, but it definitely does. Yeah, it most certainly does. The interesting thing about LSO is everybody has the same level of statutory requirement of confidentiality, whether you're an attorney or a legislative editor or a fiscal analyst or a research analyst.
Thank you.
And so, Mr. President, if I may just continue with a little bit of follow-up here, just to walk us down the path.
Talk back and forth for a minute.
Thank you. And so what we're being asked to do here is to change, as it applies to research products, the rules associated with and the statutory protections associated with something as fundamental as attorney-client privilege and confidential communications. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. On how we have historically handled the release of research products. Now, the research product that would be released would not identify the requester.
Right.
And if the product itself, you could, I think in Vice Chairman Barlow's example, he could tell who the requester was, even with the requester's name blacked out, redacted. We would not release those. That would need to be one of the checks that Representative Summers spoke about. Lily and I had discussed that as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of considerations here. There's no doubt about it. And we're not asking for a decision today, but what we would like is this council and the next council to consider this issue and what more in depth and whether there is any desire to change the current practice. And I think that we'd also like to explore options short of flipping the opt-in or opt-out too, of what we can do to enhance people to waive their confidentiality.
Senator.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And maybe that's the approach. I mean, I contemplate research products that I've asked for over the years, and I'm in the Representative Connolly camp of probably just not responding. Not that I want to withhold anything. I don't know if I've had anything over the years that I really wouldn't be comfortable just letting go if it was scrubbed, et cetera. Maybe the approach is if there is a product that research division feels has general interest, after I've seen it, coming back to me and saying, we believe this has general interest and we'd like to release it, is that okay? So it's more what Representative Summers was talking about a few minutes ago, where if you follow up with me because it's useful, I'm just gonna say yes at that point in time. But if it's the pre-waiver where I make a research request and I get like 2 seconds later the waiver where I don't know what it says, pretty slim chance I'm gonna say okay to that. And that'll probably, I mean, at that point, I suspect I would have released everything that I've asked for over the years if that was a request that was out there. That might be a way to address Senator Nethercott's concerns without, about flipping it without, and probably getting 80% to 90% of what you'd end up seeing anyway.
President, thank you. I think we're overcomplicating this issue to the point of it's not, it's dangerous and it's not fully cooked. I think Management Council or Director Obrecht and Ms. Sharp have come forward and said, hey, we want you to consider this. We're not asking you to make a decision today. And I would encourage some discretion here on that front and resist the impulsive desire to just reach out and they'll ask again if they think it has greater merit for it to be published. Well, what does that mean? Published to whom and to where and how, right? And remember, the issue is it's not like that this data and this research product never does actually get to see the light of day. If another legislator or management audit committee or another committee or anyone actually wants to know that information and has a similar question, certainly LSO will reproduce that information directed to that requestor, right? And so the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve, this is the problem. LSO does a lot of work for something that gets on a shelf. Do we want to solve that? And if so, how do we solve that? And so do we want to create a link on the website for research products that legislators have asked for that the public can then peruse? If not, then I think we need to slow her down and realize that we are going into multiple avenues of fundamental practices of how the legislature operates and interfaces with LSO staff when we have 35 new legislators coming in.
Just one thought on that, though. The unknown unknowns are what I want to read, right? So that's the concern, is if I knew to ask for this research product, which I now want, but didn't know I wanted until a few minutes ago, that would assuage that concern. But the reality is, if work has been done, I wouldn't necessarily make the large request, but if the large request has been done, I also want to see it, as long as nobody objects to me seeing it, as long as there isn't privilege. So having the capacity to go into, and it can be on SharePoint, but we know that anything that is available to one legislator is effectively de facto public, because everyone can leak everything. I still find value to having the opportunity to peruse reports that the research division did if there's no objection to it. So I do think that trying to create a system that at least asks again or makes sure that the process allows for all of us to see a work product that took a couple of weeks of time, or even little reports, is going to be valuable. I would probably read those, and honestly, I'd like to subscribe to a service where they're all just sent to my email. This is a new recent work product that the research division did, and I want to read that.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what is the default for committee requests or research papers? What is the default currently for that? Because that's an action of a committee, a request of a committee. Anyway, just expound upon that, please.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Barlow, committee requests for public, unless the committee takes up that document in an executive session or specifically ask for confidentiality on that document. So those are by default then listed under the meeting material for that on our website. And we do have a database of research products already on the website that have been approved for release.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, folks, here's we're going to let this cook, but it's been a good discussion. Ms. Sharp, Director, you've heard it all. Ultimately, it'd be nice to have a link out there, but at this point, if you want to wrap this up for us, is there anything else either you want to say regarding this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think what we'll do is we'll work with members when they're here during the session to try to get more people to sign the disclosure form. And, present that to them again when they're here during the session. And we'll report back to the next management council on how that worked and whether we think any changes might still be required after that.
Okay, a lot of new folks stepping into the process this next session. Thank you. Go ahead.
Just one last point on that. It really is the follow-up question that I think is important as to when you ask for that release. Because if I made the request, I want to read it before I release it. That's meaningful, and that isn't typically how we do it right now. So just a thought.
Senator Nethercott?
Yeah, and so part of my concerns, big picture, just before we move on, I know we have, is manipulation of data, right? And so you want to read the report first before you, just like the Speaker of the House, Summers, has identified that he doesn't want to release certain information if it doesn't support his position. That will be true in all scenarios. And also the data will be presented in a way based on how the question or the issue was framed, right? And so any result can be achieved by a proper framing of the issue. Ask a lawyer, that's what we do. And so I would urge great caution on this and how it all gets utilized. It's not that the information isn't valuable or helpful, but again, it can still be provided under certain circumstances.
Good point, Senator. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Representative Connell.
My follow-up is that the reason I wouldn't sign to start with, it's not that I wanted to understand if the data supported the position. It was in part about the clarity, and it goes to Senator Nethercott, the clarity of the question. And sometimes I've asked LSO for a research document to end up understanding that the question that I asked them to do was not clear enough. And so that concerned me, that the document that was produced didn't answer the question. And so that's why I didn't sign it to start with. So all of that to say that I think this is a good discussion that should continue. I would like to see those documents. I would, most of them, right? And so I would hope that the new management council does take it up so that there is the possibility of just having more information available to legislators as we go forward. Let's not drop this.
Yeah, fair enough, Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. So as a final note, and this is from my management audit 4 years, I think that going back to the amount of time and the priorities and the investment that our staff is making in some of these requests, I do think there's also a place to actually toll it a little bit. When you get to the end of one that took you 2 weeks, I think maybe there ought to be a score sheet on the bottom of it that says, just so we're on the board, this took a lot of staff time. And if you think there's value to this, please consider releasing it. If it's the one I'll just say the one I took, there's, like I said, there's an updated version and there's 2 previous ones, and each one of them builds on the previous one. It's, and things changed. It has a federal nexus, federal law changed. So there is it's a building situation. But if it took that staff member, 2 hours versus 2 weeks, that should actually hopefully inform me that maybe this is more valuable to a broader audience. That's just me, and I'm saying this because of 4 years of management audit and the hundreds and maybe thousands of hours that we've put in and asked people to do research that never leaves, gets any public view. So thank you, Mr. President. I urge the incoming president or chairman of Management Council to keep this on the agenda.
Go ahead, incoming president. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I think in this discussion that we need to bring back, and I know we brought it before and I can't remember the result, but I think about it now with all the new people coming in, is the strain on budget fiscal for requests there and what the limitation is, right? So, is there a way to limit that? We don't want to, right? But is there some, one, are we overrun? Are we going to become overrun? and particularly on budget fiscal, and how do we manage that? And we've always said, I think, probably the present speaker through the last 3 or 4 speakers have always said, be careful with how you use or abuse budget fiscal. I think we try to do that. But I'll be curious going into this session, how much, are we abusing budget fiscal? And how do we handle that? So some thoughts on, in the future, just write that down as notes we need to think about.
Go ahead, Senator.
And one other thing that we talked about, and again, this is a hard one to fix, but typically, anytime you make a request to LSO staff, the answer is always yes. It doesn't, and that's good, that's the job, but it doesn't usually come with do you understand how ridiculous that request is? And it maybe not phrased that way, but it probably should sometimes, right? If I have an off-the-cuff request, I'm really curious about this, and I'm literally just curious about it, and then it turns out to be 80 person-hour request. Because it was dumb, maybe. I would actually really want to know that I've just asked for too much. I know I would never mean to ask much more than like a few hours of request, and I would want feedback that, oh wow, you asked for way too much. And I don't know if we can build that in. I don't know that everyone's comfortable with that. Some LSO staff over the years have provided that type of feedback, like, just sort of the look, are you sure you want all that? And I'm, no, what do I want?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. In full disclosure, I'm probably the biggest abuser of the system. And I do appreciate it when Dawn goes, I really don't have time for this now. And so I think it's important, as director, that you let staff feel comfortable saying, hey, we're backed up. And I think it really helps then the legislator go, okay, I get it. That was too much. And I think that needs to be built more into the system as well, because it's helped regulate me, frankly.
Mr. Chairman, and I was just joking with the good majority floor leader right here about him as perhaps incoming speaker versus him as freshman. But that being said, with the concern about request to budget fiscal, I just want to put out there that there's an absolute need to understand the importance of your minority being able to ask for and receive research documents in the same way as the majority. And that I can see, perhaps some limitations based on committee chairs, appropriations, et cetera, et cetera. That being the case, it would limit the minority's access to that kind of information, or in a more timely manner. And I do have one example myself from years ago where I asked for comprehensive tax reform months and months before I got information, right, with the notion that there's no way that something like this is ever going to pass. But that was important for a minority position, to be able to have that information and to be able to go forward with it. So as you do think about kind of any kind of limitations on requests for information or bill drafts or whatever, that you do take into account the minority position. And it is the obligation of the majority to think about the minority as well.
Mr. Chairman, I think that wraps it up on that topic. We'll report back to the next council in March or April. Okay. Mr. Chairman, as we mentioned at the last meeting, the Legislative Service Office Program Evaluation function is undergoing quite a few changes. We've had significant staff departure, and the program itself is in need of some reinvestment from the legislature on what what that function should ultimately look like moving forward. And as I discussed at the last meeting, I think one way to do that is to hire consultants to help us, help LSO, but especially help the Wyoming legislature determine what they want out of the program evaluation function. So Lily drafted this RFP, and I'll let her walk through it, but the main punchline is actually starting on page 11 of the RFP. The rest is pretty boilerplate until you get there. But Lily, go ahead.
Okay, we got it.
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman and committee members, it was actually really interesting doing this RFP because what we found, if you look at the page 11 of your RFP, under number 1.2, is that there are actually other states are going through this exact same process of reevaluating their program evaluation and the function. And so if you, in the articles that talk about this, look at it as a big picture actually, is what does the legislature want in terms of an evaluation or audit function? And recognizing that in particular, when you have a citizen legislature, a very small LSO office, and now our program, actually in just a short while, our program evaluation section will only have 5 people. And so it might be a good time to, and the other thing on 1.2, what they said is, or what these articles said, this was actually a Pew Center article that said, the challenges now to program evaluation and audit is first that the governmental programs are so complex. So for example, if you wanted us to do an audit of Medicaid, that is probably over our, probably a bigger task than we could do. Then the other thing is that because there is so much turnover in legislative leadership and the members who are on the program management audit committee and there's over turnover in staff, it also makes these audits or evaluations much more difficult. Then and this is, I think, a very big contributing factor to the difficulty of these programs is buy-in. Buy-in from the, I would say especially from leadership, and especially as you have new leadership. And when if the management audit committee continues in the fashion, in the way, in having program evaluations and audit, then you may want to make sure that the members on that committee include perhaps committee chairman or or members of leadership, because what happens is if it doesn't, and this is not just Wyoming, this is nationwide, if it doesn't include leadership and the committee chairman, then the products basically our findings become unpopular. And then and what I mean unpopular among the committee chairman and among leadership. And then that puts staff in a very difficult situation where they don't like the audit, or where they feel like the audit isn't appreciated, isn't wanted. And you have to face the fact that auditors or evaluators it's a tough job. It's a very tough job. And one of the other things that the Pew Center study said is that what they suggested is that legislatures, especially one like ours, that you reevaluate, do you want this function for the state of Wyoming, for the legislature? Is it a benefit to the legislature? And if so, how should it be structured? And they suggest that you actually get also buy-in from the other 2 branches, or at least some sort of buy-in from the other 2 branches of government that you may be evaluating. And so I think An example in the past was drug courts. You'll need to, because you're going to have to work with the judiciary for drug courts and the Department of Health, you need those entities to want to do this. So what the idea is from the director and from Nationwide, is to reevaluate this function, actually have a vision session to say, what does our legislature want? Do we want to, I did contact the national, the NCSL, and they said they believe that if you're going to have a program audit function, that section alone, not including evaluation, just program audit, needs to have at the minimum 7 to 8 people. And so, and then there are states like Alaska who because apparently they don't have that number of people, but they actually try to, contract out program evaluations, and with some limited, well, I'm not sure the success of that. So that's what this RFP is more of a vision process to get all the stakeholders together to say, what do we want? How much, what will it take? How should it look in the future? Should it include fiscal audits? And if it does, do we need to have consultants to do it? Or if we want such huge audits like a Medicaid audit, or for example, an audit of our pension and whether or not we're well funded, what kind of a person or product or what sort of an entity needs to do that, and do we want to pay for it? And just again, so I mean, there are legislatures that have very large program audit divisions, and they're huge, and but ours is small because we're like other states. I think Maine has a very small one, Idaho has a very small one, and I believe those are the two that actually are the national conference thought that were the very best.
Thank you. Go ahead.
What does it cost to hire an external auditing company to come in and audit Medicaid or audit the retirement system? In other words, a massive, comprehensive audit by professionals that do that as their full-time gig. What would we end up paying for that?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know. We have in a prior job, we had some audits or what I would call sort of audits of much smaller programs, and I believe it was about $50,000. So for Medicaid, we would have to, actually, that would be part of this study.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, and just by way of example, is what we've paid for the efficiency study a few years ago, which I think was north of $2 million for that. And then what we paid, I believe the consultant's name was Barry Dunn, for the ETS, and I think that ended up being about $300,000. But I can get that number for you.
All right. Further, committee?
So, Mr. Chairman, the ask right now would be to release this RFP, see what responses we get, and then bring those responses back to council for potential action.
Director, do you need a motion to release it?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay, you've heard that, committee?
So moved.
Let's go Rothfuss, second, Summers. All right. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
This is a close one for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think I'm going to vote no. I think the committee, I go back to my first year on the committee, and we got this follow-up evaluation from the program staff on the Wyoming Business Council that had really good action items in there. And we brought a bill draft motion was going through that one night, I was like, whoa, they didn't do any bill draft motions on this, on these really good recommendations. And we brought that motion to the next session, and it got put in the Minerals Committee, which, you know, sort of had jurisdiction over the topic, but they really didn't have buy-in, and I agree with that. And, you know, my answer to that was to make the Management Audit Committee a committee that could meet during session to look at bills. And that failed 2 or 3 times on the floor. You know, I think there's a chance that this sort of study increases buy-in, but at the end of the day, most of the reforms, I think, are things that can be done in-house. I think involving the committee chairs, not necessarily having to put them on the committee, is important. And we talked about that at the last meeting. And I think emphasizing to the committee that these recommendations can be turned into bill drafts. I mean, and the current staff does a really good job of gradating those recommendations and building heft to them on why they should be there. I mean, even when the most recent report came out, I mean, there were some strong recommendations. I think there were some reasons not to move forward with the bill draft, which is why I think we ended up not even considering that motion. But I think most of this stuff can be done in-house, and if there was a real concerted, just, this is an initiative we're taking on, I actually think you'd end up with just as much, if not more. That being said, this is a close one for me, but just with the cost involved, I think, and the fact that the timing, I mean, you know, the work begins April 24th. To me, that almost puts the Management Audit Committee on pause for another year. And I just think that's a problem as well. So I'm going to be voting no on this one. Thank you.
Further discussion before the vote, Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question for the good representative. And it's, you know, I've been just thinking here and listening to what you have to say, and I think it was some really good stuff. Should it go to the committee? You know, or should Management Audit have like a home committee like Management Council where they come and bring their results, and that if Management Council chose to bring bills on that, so you actually knew that they were going to be in some place with their bills to do that? What do you think of that idea?
Representative Gray, and then to the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for listening. I appreciate that. And I do think, I'm not thrilled about the Management Council idea. I think it would be closer to what we have with some of the select committees that don't have statutory authority, where they would be asked to go through the Committee of Jurisdiction from almost updating from T to green, you know, even before the report comes out. So for example, on the Business Council one, it would be Minerals Committee would be hearing about updates on that through their agenda, through the process, and giving their recommendations. And then on the back end would also be looking at the bill. I'm not sure, I don't want to take away from the Management Audit the authority to put their name on the bill, but I think having that as part of the agenda and almost a requirement that not only the bill, but also the pre-work done as part of it, at least twice would be on that Committee of Jurisdiction's agenda. That would be my leaning on it. Not as thrilled about the Management Council idea. I think it wouldn't get the necessary buy-in as much, but thanks for the question.
Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I think there's a couple of things to also recall about Management Audit. It is a home committee for 2 agencies and part of a 3rd agency, a division of Department of Revenue. So it has other responsibilities that were just added in the last couple of years when Chairman Perkins, President Perkins was part of that. So it does have some other responsibilities as well, even though it's a statutory committee, not a rules-based committee, standing committee, if you will. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, to Representative Gray, and then follow up from the Majority Floor Leader, is I do think that there is a discussion, and I think it's with or without this RFP, and I'm going to support the RFP because I think we do understand the context of what's out there and what the possibilities are, is that where the requests come from is of, I think, valid to the point as what do we get out of them. So if the requests are coming from standing committees to manage an audit, take up this issue, dive into it, get us results, and then bring us back that work and give us a suggestion. Then that standing committee, who has the broader expertise, will have a unique work product on a very specific item that then they can decide to advance with bill ideas and suggestions, which we do get with those reports, or if they pass on it, or as Representative Gray says, some of these take more than one legislature to complete. Maybe a completely different committee, completely different interests, et cetera, then management audit or individual legislators can take those up. So I do think the source of where the requests come from, regardless of whether it's a fiscal or a financial type audit or a programmatic audit, does make a difference in their self-generated within management audit. It's hard to get buy-in. If they come from other places, from other standing committees, then that might be something for the next management council to consider as, how they tasked or how management audit is tasked. Also keeping in mind that there is statute about what management audit committee's responsibilities are that would potentially need to be adjusted if you were going to go that route. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further discussion before the vote. Representative Connolly?
When we talked about this at the last meeting, I too was ambivalent. But when I looked at the scope of work as well as the proposal submission requirements, in my mind, it's just moving the issue one step forward. And the issue is everything that's being talked about by all of the past three speakers. And honestly, it seems to me that we are in a position of really needing to reevaluate the function of management audit and the research that goes on. To me, what this does is it allows for an outside body, including NCSL, if I remember correctly. I had asked that last time, who would reply to this, and NCSL is one of them, as well as others. We don't have to accept a submission if we don't like what the scope of work is that they say they're going to do. And again, you asked for a credible amount of detail in terms of what it is they would provide to this body in order to go forward. If we don't think that will be useful, we don't have to accept it. So why not get that information so that we understand what is possible from an outside entity, because we're confident that we don't have the ability internally right now to do it. We just don't. I'm confident of that. So let's get the submissions so that the next management council can make the determination of, shall we go forward, spend the money, and get this information. So I'll vote yes. It's just the next step in the process of finding out more information that could help subsequent legislatures.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Since we're ready for the vote then. First motion moved and seconded, program evaluation consultant RFP. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Passed, one opposed. All right, let's 10 o'clock almost. Just take about a 15-minute health break, and then we'll come back and take on those next two items, okay? Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello. You know, that could have changed it, a lot of it. You know, moving the mics, I was getting.
Test, test, 1, 2, test. Test, 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 1, 2, test, test. Test, 1, 2, 3. I think it's better. I think it is better, for sure. Test, test, test. Can you still hear her, though? Or test, 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 1, 2. Test, 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 test. Yeah. Test, 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 1, 2. I think that's good. Test. Do you want me to keep talking? Test, test, okay.
Hello, hello, camera. Hello, hello, camera. Oh, I didn't know about that one. Hello, 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 camera. Hello, hello. Oh, man, I'm not in the picture. Hello, camera. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, camera. Hello, hello, hello.
Test, 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 test. This is better, for sure. It had like reverb right back. Test, test, test.
It's 10:10, 15-minute break is over. Annual agency rule report. Mr. Anderson, welcome to Management Council.
Good morning, Mr. President, Management Council. Josh Anderson, LSO. Yeah, before you, you have the 2022 annual report on rules. All this is just a brief report of the governor's responses to any of our rules. There should be a very brief report, and I'm happy to take any questions you guys might have. On page 2 of the report, you can see the first section is rules objected to by Management Council on procedural issues, so we didn't have any of those this year. Subsection B is rules objected to for substantive issues. There was one rule, a Department of Education rule, which had an incorrect citation, and we had recommended that the governor use his ability to strike a portion of the rules to remove that incorrect citation. You can see there the governor's response in the memo was that the final action by the governor had not been taken. I did hand out over the break the governor's letter from November 29th earlier this week, where he did adopt that recommendation and strike that portion of the rules, removing that incorrect citation. In subsection C, Mr. Chairman, these are just note some of the rules where we had noted some issues, but where we didn't make any recommendation to the governor. You'll see our kind of most common one over the years is a failure to note that rules are new rules, which are the first set of rules in response to some legislative action. When we get those, we provide notice to the sponsor. But if the agency doesn't let us know that, then we often don't find that out until it's time to do the rule review, which means the sponsor doesn't get that notification. So we do note that. Some other ones we've noted, you'll see a list there of other rules where we made noted technical or procedural issues, but that we didn't recommend any non-consent. those can vary from just grammatical errors all the way up to some more substantive questions that we might have, where we might recommend changes in a future rulemaking or similar. And you'll see then in subsection D, rules removed from the consent list pending discussion. We don't have any of those this year. And then in subsection E, rules reviewed by LSO without objection, but objected to by the governor. There was one rule that we did get a letter on earlier this month. November 18th, the governor disapproved a portion of some Wyoming Business Council rules. We did note these issues actually in subsection C. You'll see that rule was listed, ARR 2154. We had noted some of these issues to potentially address in a future rulemaking, but the governor went ahead and struck those using his ability to strike portions of the rules before approving them. Those issues were, the rules appeared to include language from another set of rules that they had inadvertently copied in. Governor struck that out. And then there were two places where the rules stated that they would apply to any business, while the statute had more limitations, and so that reference to any business was stricken in two locations. That's really the report. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay. You may be getting off easy, Mr. Anderson. All right. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Request from Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments. We don't have Chairman Nicholas here yet, so we'll just pause for just a moment while we find our appropriations co-chair. They're tracking him. Doing all call? Chairman Nicholas, welcome. Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments. Request. What is your request, sir?
Thank you. I appreciate the time. I'm sorry I didn't wear my tie. I'm en route out of town at the moment, so thanks for being early as well. So what the CapFin is requesting is to have Management Council approval to schedule a meeting, basically an all legislative meeting in the first day or two or three, whatever fits in the schedule, of basically a presentation of two bills that are coming out of the CapFin. And the reason that we think it's important to have time to have an explanation is, number one, it's to understand the bills, it's fairly complicated, and with the new members, to do that on the floor will be difficult. Number two is that it's probably the biggest dollar amount bill that's going to come across the floor during the session, because the total appropriation of the bill right now as drafted is about 645 million of our surplus dollars, all in total. The reason, what this bill does is it and this came to us, by the way, from RBK, that's our investment advisors, that says that we've got over $1 billion sitting in our reserve accounts. That $1 billion is sitting there making a return of between 0.5% to 1.5%. And that's what's been making over, since those reserve accounts were created. And the reason is because they have to remain relatively liquid, because that's the purpose of the reserve. And so if you have an emergency, whether it's with the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, the Common Schools, the Hathaway, the endowment for the education, you have to have cash, and that's the purpose of the reserves. But the way it was explained to us, that most endowments or folks that have similar reserves have larger reserves. And the reason they have larger reserves is because then you can forecast that you're only going to need a small percentage of that reserve over time. And what they recommend is a 5 to 7 year bridge, so that if you need the funds, like for example, on the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund for the guaranteed 5%, then you've got a guaranteed 5% in that permanent reserve account. And so, but what it does is it allows us to take all these reserves and invest them in a long to medium term profile with a liquid component to it. And what they were explained to us is that our opportunity cost loss, just in the 3 funds besides the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, because we're only talking about the 3 other funds right now, is that our opportunity cost in the last 5 years was roughly $370 million. By changing our investment strategies, increasing and taking this $600+ million and adding it to the reserve accounts of those 3 major accounts, we will have an average increase per year of income to the state of roughly 115 to 120 million. I mean, the numbers are kind of amazing. And so as we sit back and we're going, number one, why wouldn't we do it? And that, I've got a handout, I don't know if it's been circulated, that kind of walks through those numbers, and it just got redrafted and updated, so we'll circulate it. But, what you do is you take our average return on the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund is about 6.7%. Our returns are less, 1.5 or less for these accounts. If we can go halfway to 3.5%, and you just plug that number in on all these reserve accounts, it comes out to about $115, $120 million a year, $240 million a biennium. That's the equivalent of what Craig's forecast is of our lost income in 25, 26, and in 27, 28 if you look at the Craig. And so this is an opportunity where simply by changing our investment strategies and how we manage our money, we can help cover the deficit that decline in revenues that we know is coming in the next 4 to 6 years. And it's really that simple. But the way we want to present it, and as we discuss the manner of it, we'd like to have RBK and Patrick. RBK is the investment team that advises the State Treasurer's Office. Patrick and probably 1 or 2 other experts present this information, go through the analysis of what we do, where this money is invested, how it works, so it's not a political presentation. If I get up on the floor and do what I'm doing right now, there are going to be people who vote against it simply because of the fact that I'm doing it. And then it becomes a political football. And we just don't want that to happen. It's an important enough in dollars and cents that we're saying, well, how can we do this in a egalitarian fashion that people understand why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and the pros and cons of it, and can ask questions of the experts versus me or somebody else. Or, it was President Perkins, but now it'll be Larry and Dave who will be presenting it basically on the Senate side. But we just think, well, what we need to do is kind of do a building blocks of education of what's going on, why it works, what the numbers mean, and have someone who's independent and strictly there for a financial basis and practicality of what's the best for the state of Wyoming and what other people do and the best practices, and have that presented to the body as a whole. And, you know, we can do it in probably 45 minutes to an hour fairly easily, and then do a question and answer afterwards. And so my request, and Cap Finn's request, is that we come before you, explain to you what we'd like to do, and then see if we can get your condolences to put us on the calendar somewhere in the first few days of session. So be happy to answer questions.
Thoughts on this committee? Go ahead. Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the state treasurer's position on the amendments? Where is he at? And then also, do you have an issue with him being at this presentation as well?
Absolutely not.
Go
And
ahead.
my understanding is the treasurer's office is entirely in favor of it. And in fact, this is a derivative of the investment advice from the state treasurer's investment advisors, and
Folks,
which is
you-
RVK.
You got the numbers in front of you now, too. These are open to question, but I think there's wisdom in this approach. Anybody else? Did I see a hand down here? Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So why is this different than any other committee, any other bill? You could always book a room and have this discussion. So I guess my question is, what is management council's role in that?
Go ahead.
I think that the role of management council is, essentially it's a recognition that this is an important thing, and it's, you can't just book a room and go do something. You don't get anyone to show up. Well, we will need management council, but we'll also need the leadership of both houses to, you know, at caucus to say, there's this meeting coming up, this is what's coming up, and we won't be, or we'll adjourn if we're in session, or we'll, if we're not in session, if it's the Monday or Tuesday, we strongly recommend your participation. This is one of the ways that we're going to fix our financial future and prevent tax increases and do those things that we can do to better manage our money.
I think there's wisdom in this. Any other discussion? Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. President. And just to be clear, the presentation would be done with the consulting firm in conjunction with the chairs of appropriation. So it's really about having the consulting firm do the presentation, unlike it would be done on the floor, which would be done by
Exactly. And
members.
this will have handouts, it'll have slideshows, slide decks. It'll be the treasurer's office and their advisors, not me. I won't be saying anything. That's the whole point.
Okay. Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
Mr. President, just as a follow-up, it's an interesting idea. And first, this is an incredible opportunity, I think, for the state in general. But I also think that it's something for maybe this body to consider as we go forward for years from now. But for school finance recalibration, for example, that's another kind of major money issue that this could be it could be an example that we could consider for the future as well. It seems like a good idea to me.
Very
So
good.
let me go into one other issue because it's something that you need to understand. So the bill draft, it's not finalized, but the bill draft is actually quite simple. It just redirects money out of the LSRA and out of the common schools, which is part of that excess revenue that we have coming in this biennium. And so the common schools will go to the common schools permanent trust reserve account, and the other dollars will come out of the LSRA. And all the bill does is raise the number. So the bill's actually pretty simple. It just raises the number on the I think right now your spending reserve account is 150%. One goes up to 240, one goes up to about, I forget what the other number is. It depends on the balances of the accounts on how high you got to go. And so that's what the bill does. But the reason that you don't have a bill in front of you, because we're still tinkering with it, because one of the most important things that the bill is going to do or needs to do is to create a mechanism that demonstrates or at least educates the members that these reserve accounts, when we do this, are going to be, in essence, other than for the purpose that they are there for, which is a reserve account for particular permanent accounts like the common schools, they're inviolate. In other words, you can't use them as leverage. You can't use them to guarantee anything else, because once you do that, that changes the management structure in the treasurer's office. And so the treasurer will explain that at the same time. And that there's preambles that we're crafting in the bill that says these funds are meant to be for this purpose only, and it's contrary to the purpose of these reserve accounts to have anyone do anything to them. And so one of the other things that CAPFIN and JAC have been doing is pulling anything that's been we've guaranteed with our reserve accounts and moving them to basically the LSRA or some other location, because it's just a bad practice we have, that we do that, particularly like the permanent metals run reserve account. We've used that as a backstop on certain things. And so that we're gonna have to change that practice and create a policy and whatever safeguards we need to do in that bill to make sure that once, all of a sudden the common schools account goes from, I think it's 340 or 350 million, it's going to go up to about 670 million. But that's inviolate, number one, and that's what the bill says. You can't make it inviolate. It's not like it's a constitutional amendment, but you create the structure and the information in it, and you explain that the investments are in a medium term, primarily in a medium term, non-liquid format. So you can't use them as guarantees, because then it defeats the purpose of it. And you basically, that will cost money, because you've got to go in and start selling those assets to liquidate, to go into more of a liquid fashion when you use them as guarantees. And I know that that's been an issue that we've had these discussions with the chief executive, with Albert. And so I want to make sure everyone's comfortable with the bill before we move forward and we get a consensus on the bill itself. So I just want to put all the cards on the table on what this involves and what our thought process is.
Especially where we have so many new members. What's the logistics on this, Mr. Chairman? Your committee handles it with LSO or the Treasurer's Office? How does this all come together?
We'll do it in tandem with the Treasurer's Office.
Okay.
Basically with Patrick.
All right. So with us, Director, does this have to be formal motion or just a nod of approval? Your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, it really just depends on what Chairman Nicholas is asking for here. I think that if we want to reserve the auditorium on maybe Monday morning, the 9th,
Right.
for an hour and a half or 2-hour presentation, all members will already be paid for that day and receive travel and per diem. So there's not a cost associated with that. It's just really what council wants to do with this request. Do you want to put out a letter to all members, suggesting their attendance at it? Do you want that to be?
From us as a managing council or from leadership of the House and the Senate? Who puts out the letter?
Right. I think that was exactly where I was going to ask next. Who is the appropriate entity? Is it management council? Is it the president and speaker, majority and minority floor leaders? For you to consider what you want to do.
Chairman Nicholas, I think this is a great opportunity. I want to understand it better. Can we all fit in that auditorium? Yeah, okay. Very good.
I think it fits 270 people.
Right. Okay.
Mr. President, I would support those proposals. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that the letter or the request just comes from both. But if you want to pick one, then I would suggest leadership of both houses.
First day, not everybody's sworn in. Can we just do one joint from old leadership, new leadership together? Pardon? Well, technically correct. Old leadership then.
I would just suggest, if those new members really are going to play that card, it's going to be a rough go. So I would suggest it comes from the current speaker and the current president, leadership, and then management council as well. And I mean, it's to their advantage,
Yeah,
right?
this is a good, that's a good approach. Appreciate Chairman Nicholas bringing this up. Mr. Speaker, you good to sign on to that letter? Okay. We'll give you a letter. Does that work, Chairman?
work.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I do think this is a good idea because I have some real concerns about the bill, so I do want to understand the whole issue better. So I think the only way we can understand it is if we have some ability to sit down and hear presentations on it.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. So at the risk of every committee coming to us and asking for something like this.
Not every committee does this kind of heavy
Yeah,
lift.
and maybe not in somebody's mind, but maybe in their mind, they do. I think that the uniqueness of this one is you're bringing in outside experts. For the dollars, it's the outside experts that are going to be here at a specific point in time to inform when they may not be here during our standing committee meetings or during, et cetera, throughout the session, or not be near as available, et cetera. So I think this does have value in trying to concentrate the expertise and the interested parties in the room at the same time early in the process so that we can get some of these concerns vetted out. So that's, I mean, I'm supportive of it. I'll support the letter. Certainly it'll be up to incoming leadership to marshal their folks to get there and to understand and to be a part of it. But I'm certainly willing to reserve the room, have the fundamentals, i.e. the invitations and the materials all put into place and to make it happen. So thank you, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Senator.
If I may, I respect the concern that has been presented here of the precedent being set of every committee is going to think that their topic or their issue is just really important and is going to require special time in the legislature to help pitch their bill draft. And so for purposes of precedent in guiding management council in the future, what are those distinguishing facts here today? One is this is the most consequential bill that they'll be voting on in this session as a result of the amount of money it touches, which is 600 and some million, right? And so, a significant amount of funds outside of our typical approval of a budget that they vote on. And so this bill draft will have one of the most consequential votes that they'll make. Recognizing that we will have at least over 30 brand new members into the Wyoming legislature, that in fairness to them, there is no way that they can do due diligence in understanding the significance of their vote without this opportunity and interfacing with these particular experts for this vote. And so we're doing our due diligence to provide them the opportunity to do it as well. And then the reliance on historical leadership to provide guidance and credibility on trust on this kind of vote is, I think, damaged, well, not damaged, but is different as a result of the change of the number of new legislators coming in, and then we have this new shift of time of new leadership all around, right, who may or may not have served on appropriations or have served on CapFin before and understand the significance of what's going on. So a combination of those factors and the timing of this bill and the failure to move this bill forward at this time as well, taking in those considerations, knowing that the possibility is there to lose out on the investments of millions of dollars in return back to the state. It's not prudent to delay for more knowledge and experience under everyone's feet, that it's prudent to move forward now, but just to do our best to make it work.
In the state's future. This is a good opportunity, not
bet.
just for the new folks,
And I'll
but the
get
old
the
folks.
current bill circulated, particularly you, Albert. And any fresh ideas or new ideas on how we can ensure that these funds are protected. The better the bill is, obviously, the more support we'll get. So.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, you're good with the consultant suggestion coming from our speaker? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, good. All right, go ahead.
So just to be clear, Mr. President, so we're not asking for any formal action out of this
Correct.
committee. You and I are going to make a request with LSO
Right.
to work with the chairman to have a a letter come from us to go out to membership, incoming membership, regarding the date, time, and.
Sooner the better as
Right.
people schedule
Right.
that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Where are the proceeds going to go? So I guess my potential, I think one of the problems with this is, and one of the things that needs to be looked at, is LISRA has functions. It backstops a number of important accounts. And it has become the backstop for the biggest expenditure in Wyoming state government. So you take, it's basically like the revenue source for that account. It's basically what it is. And one of the problems that that account has had that is causing its deficit is because it is basically funded by two revenue streams. And then there was a third that totally went away. So I guess, if you're going to take 640 million from the LISRA, you need to make sure that part of the investment returns that it helps to effectuate, that it's used to help replenish that, plus, receive some of those returns as well. It can't just go to some building account or, and so I understand what you're trying to do, but I am concerned, in addition to the fact that it basically does away with any opportunity for cash-based budgeting, I would say, which was a request of the committee to consider. I don't think based on its makeup, I don't feel like it really went anywhere. I'm not sure, maybe you can report on that as well. So where are the proceeds that this transfer helps to effectuate? Where are it going to go? Because if the LISRA is not only replenished, but some of those proceeds help to strengthen the LISRA, then what's going to happen? Yeah, you can increase the returns by hundreds of millions of dollars, but when we enter a bust cycle, which is going to happen, then we're going to be back in the same place we were 3 years ago, which is that one account has a huge deficit, and then we'll be with less of a backstop than we would have otherwise.
All right.
And you're going to have the same arguments about the tax increases.
Let's keep this
that we had
yeah.
three.
We're talking about millions in the future, so close out your
No,
statement,
we're-
Representative, and then we'll have them explain, but go ahead.
So what I'm trying to do is talk about where the proceeds are going to go. Because when the LISRA continues to be rated for other purposes, you're going to have an issue down the line if it is not replenished. So,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman?
I think that's fairly simple. A couple different things. Number one, in the next biennium, as we start, the LISRA is going to have a additional contribution, according to the best guess, and which is usually conservative from Craig, of roughly 970 million. So LISRA will be for the first time over about $2.1 billion by the end of the biennium. And so currently, we haven't seen it yet, but there's a governor's letter going to come out that's going to ask for about 450 million of that now $970 million surplus to go to the permanent metal trust fund. So what we're doing is going to run in conflict with the governor's approach, and we've had this discussion with him. And it's so it's his idea versus our idea at this point. But I think there's middle ground for that. But number two, and so the answer is that when we do this, out of the LISRA, only about 450 million will come out of it for this project, or about 350 million. The other will come out of the Common School Reserve Account, or basically it's the capital surplus on the school side, which is also roughly about $900 million. So we'll be taking about 350 million out of that, which will go into the Common School Reserve Account. So the LISRA only depleted from about 2.1 billion down to about 1.7 based upon this, where it actually currently sits about right now. And so we're really not detracting or depleting from the LISRA at all by doing this because of the surplus. But we are doing, in one fashion, is preventing further abilities to go in and tap that $900 million surplus with various individual bills, because with the governor's request and with our request, basically it's going to be mostly tied up. And so in some ways, this is a way to actually save more dollars than would otherwise be saved that you can anticipate on the floor. And then you say, where does the money go? The money, they've already, well, the Treasurer's Office is already creating a new account, which will be very similar to the Common Schools Permanent Funds. The only difference is on that really long-term investments, they go into something that's more of a short-term, medium-term, and more liquidable if it has to be in a short-term duration. And so we'll be going from 1.5%, where that money would go right now in LISRA at most, to a 3.5 to a 5.5%. And that's how we, and so that, you know, the return on those total dollars comes to $115 million a year, or $230 a biennium, where that's how much more money we're going to make. And the money's just going to be sitting there earning investments, and we tie it up so it's not as easily available to a rogue legislature that all of a sudden wants to spend a bunch of money. So I think it does exactly what you're suggesting we need to do, is protect the dollars and protect our long-term investments.
Thank you. Good explanation. Representative, you need to further ask on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, and I do think it's appropriate, because you were talking about coming here and continuing to get buy-in on the bill and feedback. And so what I would ask of you is to consider making it clear that account in some way. You know, it's like the SIPA. You know, how do we put some language in there suggesting that the cash will be used in a backstop in the case of a cash crunch in the future, okay? And you know, and can be reverted back into a situation where it can be liquid, okay? And so that's all I'm saying. And I can tell you, there's a lot of representatives are going to have this concern, and so that's just my feedback.
So,
Let's go ahead and close this out,
I would
Mr.
agree,
Chairman.
and that's
Go ahead.
kind of the conversation I had with Majority Floor Leader.
Okay, good, thank you. And so at this time, absent objection, we're going to move forward with the letter, put this out, and Chairman Nicholas, thank you. Safe travels wherever you're going. All right, let's move on to the next one, Revisor's Bill. Mr. Hopkinson. Okay, all right. Mr. Hopkinson, go ahead. Revisor's Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 23 LSO 324, Working Draft 0.4, the Revisor's Bill. Much of this bill the committee has already seen, but there are some new areas. But I'll just walk quickly through it, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address those. On page 2, first change we'll see is on line 15, simply a grammatical adjustment in the apostrophe there in the year to years. On page 3, the next change we'll see is on line 3. This correction is simply correcting the reference that it should be to Article 3 of the chapter, not to Chapter 3 of the article. Bottom of page 3, the changes there on lines 19 through 21 are primarily reordering the statutory numbers, simply to be consistent with with how we order them in numerical order. There is one change to correct a statutory reference in 14.4.117 from 14.4.116. On page 4, line 5, simple change there, changing an incorrect use of insure to ensure. On line 15, on page 4, getting rid of an extraneous and. On page 5 then, line 5, correcting the spelling of the term or the word fresco. On line 19 of page 5 is simply striking an extraneous "for." On page 6, lines 10 through 12, is primarily correcting a grammatical citation, or excuse me, a statutory citation, and then changing that to "when" for grammatical purposes. On lines, page 7, changing the word "core" to "cores," core. You pronounce that the same way, I think. But anyway, correcting that word there. On page 8, this is striking on line 2 a reference to a statute that has already been repealed. And the same thing on line 6, again striking a reference to a statute that is repealed. On pages, bottom of page 8 in the section 2115-121, extending through towards the bottom of page 9, the changes there, removing the terms educational suitability and technology readiness. This particular request is a change that comes about when 2021 Senate File 2 made some extensive changes to these school facility statutes. They deleted any measure of educational suitability and technological readiness. And so these were terms should have been stricken in that bill, but they were not. This may go slightly beyond what we typically do in the reviser's bill, but whether or not this is suitable for the reviser's bill is a judgment call of this committee, if whether or not these are substantive changes. But that's where those changes are coming from, just removing some language that was missed in a previous bill. On page 10, the change on line 4 is just changing the term insured to the proper term there that should have been insurer for the proper reference. On page, also on page 10, just adding a comma on line 17. On page 11, that change there is to correct the definition of the term "this act" in 31.5.102 to include, or to extend it to a chapter that should have been included when that change was made. On page 12, lines 1, just removing a reference again to a repealed section. Lines 13 and 21, changing the term "government" to the more grammatically correct "governance" within the context of those two statutes. On page 13, again correcting a definition of "this act" to include a statute that should have been included when that statute was added, and the same thing on line 17. The changes made in 39.13.109 that we see on lines 3 and 4 are simply for grammatical correctness of that sentence. Again, maybe slightly outside of what we commonly see in the reviser's bill, but again, that's a judgment call for this committee if that change is appropriate. And then finally, line 15 on page 14, removing or striking the Q, that subsection has been repealed. And then finally, section 2 on page 15, repealing 2116.1307C. That section refers to, or it concerns a Hathaway Success Curriculum requirements for pre-2010 students and is obsolete. And the act would be effective July 1st, 2023, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions on this bill.
Thank you, and appreciate your fact sheet that you included with this. Members of the committee, questions for Mr. Hopkinson? Questions? Okay. You got it easy, sir. Thank you for the report. Go ahead. No, not so easy.
No, it's not a question. I'll just note, and this will probably be provided to the legislature, but when you look at the subject line of the memo, the subject line is from last year's, so just a little amendment for an update when you do this again. Thanks.
Okay. Professor noted. Thank you. All right. Do you have something? Okay. All right, motion to sponsor the bill. Go ahead.
So moved?
Second? Second. Discussion? Moved and seconded, sponsor the reviser's bill. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. A roll call? Okay. All right, go ahead.
On 23 LSO-0324, the reviser's bill, Senator Driscoll is excused. Senator Hicks,
Excused.
excused. Senator Nethercott. Senator Rothfuss. Representative Connolly.
Aye.
Representative Gray. Representative Greer is excused. Representative Summers. Speaker Barlow. President Dockstader.
Aye.
Mr. President, you have 7 ayes and 3 excused.
Thank you. Okay, folks, as we're running ahead, if we skip, not skip lunch necessarily, but if we go straight into legislator compensation, that will be more detailed. It will take some time. And if it looks like, I guess we could break during that, or let's see how far we get, Director. Yeah. Let's get started on it.
Mr. Chairman, this agenda item continues your discussion from the October meeting of the work of your subcommittee on legislator compensation. At that meeting, you approved a bill to increase the per diem for members, and also a bill to increase the constituent allowance from $750 a quarter to $1,000 a quarter. The bills in front of you today, the first one is 23 LSO 229, and what you asked for at the October meeting was I had included within one bill draft a bill that increased legislator compensation in 4 years to $230, but also created a commission to make recommendations on state official salaries. You asked to see those two ideas split out in 2 separate bills. So that's what 229 is, the legislator compensation, and LSO 380 is the state official compensation commission. So first, 229 really does just what I explained that it did. For the 68th legislature, all right? 69th. 69th legislature, it will increase the legislator compensation to $230 per day. It remains at $150 per day until January 11th, 2027. Mr. Chairman, that's 23 LSO 229, working draft 4.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this? 229? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The PowerPoint presentation that was circulated at the last Management Council meeting, it was in the meeting packet. It's not in this one. It shows us, I mean, we didn't really end up going through it. It shows us being in the middle of the pack in terms of compensation with our surrounding states. So can you talk a little bit about the background on that? I mean, it showed us right in the middle. I think South Dakota was lower. So can you talk a little bit about that, the background on that PowerPoint? Thank you.
Director?
Representative Gray, I didn't bring the PowerPoint with me today, and it's a couple years old. But, so I just couldn't speak to what other states pay on that. If we wanted to talk about that more later, we'd have to get that PowerPoint and bring it back, bring that back up.
Okay. All right, further discussion? Yeah, we'll need public comment, as I was about to say. Oh, Driscoll. Senator Driscoll, would you like to join?
I'm on. Thank you very much.
Great. You heard the presentation on the bill?
I have not. I will skip on the vote.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and accept public comment if there is any. There being none. Move the bill. Second?
Second.
Roll call.
Chairman,
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to be voting no on this. This LSO document showed us in the middle of the pack and surrounding states and average salary, and obviously the bill on the per diem is already advanced, which handles that issue. So I just don't think it's appropriate at this time, so I'll be a no. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be a no as well. I think if we can get over the hump of the per diem bill and the other, I think that's about enough to handle. And certainly we can bring this forward, but I'll be a no.
Thank you. Further questions, comments?
Mr. President, I will also be a no. I believe I've already voted to give myself a pay raise, so I'll be a no as well.
Thank you. Further? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, per diem is not, in my mind, per diem is not a pay raise. Per diem is actually the cost of staying around the state, and it is in no way a pay raise. And so what this bill does is instead it takes a look at where inflation has taken us since the $150 per day was established to what the expectation is for, I think, today, not even the 4 years from now when this bill goes into effect. I'd also like to remind the committee that this impacts no legislator. It goes out for years in terms of time.
Senator Driscoll, mute.
Yes.
Thanks, Senator.
Hello?
Just need you to mute, Senator Driscoll. Go ahead.
Okay. And again, just to remind the committee that this does not go into effect until 2027, I believe. And we have talked extensively about the desire to increase the possibility of a broader spectrum of individuals to be able to participate in the legislature. And this is one means to do it. So I'll be an aye vote.
Thank you. Further discussion? Take the roll. Go ahead, take roll.
Mr. President, on 23 LSO-0229, legislator compensation, Senator Driscoll has abstained, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Senator Hicks is excused. Senator Nethercott. Senator Rothfuss. Representative Connolly. Representative Gray. Representative Greer is excused. Representative Summers. Speaker Barlow. President Dockstader. You have 3 ayes, 3 noes, 2 excused, and 1 abstained.
Meeting with my mic on, 231 SO 229, legislator compensation has failed. Next bill up for consideration. Director.
Mr. Chairman, it's 23 LSO 380, State Officials Compensation Commission. This bill draft creates an independent commission of 7 members, 3 appointed by the governor, 2 members appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and 1 member each appointed by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. The members on the commission biannually make recommendations on salary adjustments for the 5 statewide elected officials, members of the legislature, justices of the Supreme Court, district court judges, circuit court judges, and district attorneys. The commission's staffed by LSO. There's a small appropriation to LSO to pay for the per diem and mileage for members of the commission through the effective date of the act, from the effective date of the act through June 30th, 2024. Mr. Chairman, I included on page 4 some considerations for the commission to take when considering what recommendations to make to the legislature for appropriate salary increases. Starts on line 7 on page 4. The level of compensation necessary to attract individuals who are qualified to serve in an official position, to seek nomination for the position, the percent average adjustment of salaries provided to executive branch employees since the last adjustment to an official's compensation, the percentage change in the Wyoming Cost of Living Index since the last adjustment to an official's compensation. For a member of the legislature, the total compensation necessary to encourage candidates to seek election, which would produce a legislature that is representative of the Wyoming electorate as a whole. For a justice of the Wyoming Supreme Court, district court judge, circuit court judge, or district attorney, the average market pay in Wyoming of an attorney qualified to serve in those positions. And Mr. Chairman, that's a quick synopsis of 23 LSO 3.
Thank you. Questions, committee? Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yes. So what is the nature of how these recommendations are going to be sort of, what's the process that the bill asks them to go through for that?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, they are just to meet twice during any legislature, any term of the legislature, and to consider what recommendations, salary adjustment recommendations to make to the next legislature. So I think that they could use those factors and any other factors they deemed relevant in making those recommendations.
Thank you. Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I don't remember from the previous packet, like how many states have a commission? How does this look like with what other states do?
Director?
I just don't remember.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we did the research on on how many other states use this. It is used in other states, but how widespread, I'm not sure.
Okay, further questions? State Officials Compensation Commission, further questions? I knew that. Public comment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Go ahead. Any further public comment? Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, we do have public comment.
Good morning. My name is Elisa Butler. I'm the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. And I just came to speak to this bill and tell you that we are supportive of a mechanism that would review salaries for justices and judges regularly. It would help us retain judges and also help us get judges, qualified judges on the bench. I think it's one of the things that potentially could be a drawback for some private practice attorneys who are making quite a bit of money in private practice. The salaries are something that we should be looking at pretty regularly. Right now, it happens when the judges and justices basically get really far behind other states, and then we come and ask for a salary increase. But if there was a mechanism to allow for that review more regularly, I think it would be beneficial to the judiciary as a whole.
Thank you. Would you one more time state your name and position?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, my name is Elisa Butler. I'm the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch.
Thank you. Questions for Elisa? There being none? Okay, thank you. Appreciate you coming in on that. Any further public comment? With that, is there a question? Question on the bill? Roll call. Let's move it. Go ahead. First, moved by Summers, second?
Second.
Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 6, I would like to remove line 7, members of the legislature. Ask for a second for sake of discussion.
Is there a second? Second for discussion, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, these are recommendations, but I don't think, you know, my next motion is going to be for executive offices. I just don't think that it's good to delegate that authority in any way, even in a recommendation sense. I mean, we can, certainly the Management Council can review this, but I think the spirit of the Constitution is that would not be delegated in any way, that discussion. So I think that, I do think the executive agencies should be removed, the 5 statewide should be removed, and certainly members of the legislature, but obviously this motion is just for members of the legislature. And then, you know, if we want to keep it to judicial, which I know there's a lot of discussion on that always, then I think that's fine. But I think that just keeping with the Constitution, at least the spirit of what I think they were bringing when they had those provisions, I don't think there should be any delegation of that authority. Thank you.
This is on line 7 only, members of the legislature. Any further discussion on the amendment? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, even though I seconded, I'm not going to support that amendment. All I see this as is people reviewing the data, providing a recommendation, which we can ignore if we so choose. And I haven't yet decided quite how I'm going to vote on the bill, but I think it just is a recommendation. It's not an authority.
Okay, thank you. Want to respond to that? Any further questions? Okay, all right. This is on the amendment, line 7. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Amendment has failed. Next amendment?
Chairman, thank
Go ahead.
you. I would like to bring a motion to delete page 5, lines 20 through 23, and then page 6, lines 1 through 5.
Explain. Oh, second. Is there a second for discussion? Second for discussion. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the second, Representative Summers. And I don't want to add much to the discussion. I think if you were to rank the issues, I would probably put this below legislators because of the constitutional concerns. But I just think if we're going to have a commission, I think it's okay for the judges. But, we just did a huge increase on these, and I just don't think the timing to just keep having them look at this is appropriate at this time.
Representative, would you repeat your lines, please? And then
So it was page 5, lines 20 through 23, delete, and page 6, lines 1 through 5. So basically, it would delete the 5 statewide electeds. The previous motion dealt with the members of the legislature. It did fail. So, I decided to do separate motions because I think they're separate issues.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussions on this? We're on the amendment. Call for the question. All those in favor on the amendment, lines 19 through 23 on page 5, lines 1 through 6 on page 6. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay.
No.
Amendment has failed. All right, back on the bill. Any further amendments on the bill? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate this bill, having just experienced the negative consequences of having voted for salary increases for state employees, including the 5 statewide electeds, and local county offices like the district attorneys, the judges, and others, and certainly felt the fallout from that politically, from having to take that hard decision in order to bring those raises and those salaries to what would be a comparable wage for others serving in similar positions. So I do have concerns about the ability of the legislature to actually do their constitutional duties because of the harsh political fallout associated with making those appropriate decisions. So I respect the need for a commission. I worry that it's not enough to allow for those appropriate changes to be made, particularly for members of the judicial branch, those county officers like district attorneys and county sheriffs and county attorneys. Certainly very hard on them, recognizing that the legislature has to make these decisions to determine their salaries, and how unfair and politically hard that is for members of the legislature. So I support this effort and thinks it helps move the needle to provide justification for those legislators who have the courage to make those votes.
Thank you. Further discussion? State Officials Compensation Commission. Further discussion? Ready for the question? Question being called. Roll call.
Mr. President, on 23 LSO-0380, State Officials Compensation Commission, Senator Driscoll.
No.
Senator Hicks is excused. Senator Nethercott. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Connolly.
Aye.
Representative Gray. Representative Greer is excused. Representative Summers. Speaker Barlow. President Dockstader. Mr. President, you have 6 ayes, 2 noes, and 2 excused.
Bill is passed. State Officials Compensation Commission. Director, next bill up for consideration.
Mr. Chairman, you've got 2 versions of the next bill, 23 LSO 316, Working Draft 0.5 and Working Draft 0.6. Working Draft 0.5 was presented at the October meeting, and it provides for legislators to be able to enroll in the State Employee Group Health Insurance Program as an official, as in the same manner that other officials are able to enroll. The one change or addition to the bill that wasn't presented in October is providing for deductions from payroll checks for legislators. This gives the Department of Administration and Information, which administers the EGI program, the ability, if a legislator doesn't make enough money in a certain month to cover their full premium cost, to have the ability to withdraw that directly from the legislator's checking account or savings account. It's the same mechanism the EGI has for retirees. So a member who signed up, a legislative member who signed up for that would have to agree to be able to provide that information. So, but in this version of the bill, a legislator pays the same premium cost for whatever plan they enroll in for their dependent as a state employee would. So the legislative branch, or through your budget, would pay the employer's share of that premium, just like you do for LSO staff currently. In Working Draft 0.6, the legislator is responsible for both the employer and employee share of the premium. So the legislator is eligible to purchase or eligible to be enrolled in the health insurance, but has to pay both the employer and the employee's share.
Thank you. So we've got 0.5, 0.6. We just take these individually and let Representative Barlow step in and explain now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the second bill request was actually one I have. It actually has some changes that EGI suggested as well in it, as far as what the role the legislature plays in, specifically our Legislative Service Office as the enrolling agent. So the legislature plays, or our staff plays a greater role in that way this one is. So there's actually, if one or the other passes, there needs to be a merging of the ideas between the two because of that component that was suggested to us by the state agency responsible for this and EGI within it, ANI within. So the memo that I better let the, I haven't seen this one, so no, this is the original memo from Prime. So this would be the cost to the legislator cost on that second line, on that first chart, that we would be budgeting for depending on, how many people enroll. So the bill suggestion that I asked Matt to, one is include the EGI request for LSO's role in this process. It's a process role. The second part is to have the legislator, i.e. the individual, pay the entire cost. If I'm private, I am self-employed, I pay the entire thing. And I felt like this was and not all legislators are going to take up this benefit because they have other employment, et cetera. So I felt this is one way to kind of level the playing field. If you want access to the benefit of the group plan, which is a tremendous benefit, and we'll get some numbers on that if either of these bills pass, then I felt it was up to me as an individual. If I opt in, I pay the entirety. I have the access, but I pay the entirety of the premium due. That's the difference between the two bills, Mr. Chairman. It was at my request that the second one, not only for those technical things or programmatic things, but for the policy issue of whether the legislature pays the entire thing or whether the LSO or the state pays part of their
Starting on the
premium.
first
Thank
draft,
you.
any questions on that 0.5? Committee, go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for staff. On the chart provided on page 2 of the handout, that column that says health, is that a monthly? That's a monthly?
That's a monthly premium cost.
Thank you.
Further questions, 0.5? Go ahead.
So just so that I'm clear, it's my understanding then that the 0.5 draft doesn't have any of the EGI revisions that would be necessary as far as deducting from the paycheck. That would have to be amended into the 0.5?
Go ahead, Director.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, the suggestions from EGI were to have LSO be the enrolling agency and also to specify that LSO, it would be the agency to provide the employer contribution. We can handle both of those on conceptual motions today if 0.5 moves forward.
Okay, and those are not in 0.5, they are in 0.6, and we would need them in 0.5. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, we're good. Representative Barlow, do you want to weigh in on any of that? Okay. All right, further questions on this? Further questions on 0.5? Public comment on 0.5? Any further public comment? Oh, so go ahead. Name for the record, you know how it works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Richard Garrett, and you know me within several contexts, and I'm speaking today as a member of the Healthy Wyoming Coalition, but not necessarily on behalf of the coalition. I applaud you, by the way, for moving through your agenda so quickly, and I apologize for not being here and ready to comment on legislative compensation. So if I may, very quickly, I certainly would have supported that, honestly. The notion of a citizen legislature is something of a happy legend, if not anachronism. You all work very, very hard and put in a lot of hours. And there are those that want to put in those hours too that cannot, because there is a barrier to their ability to maintain their lives if they devote so much of their lives to service of our beautiful state. So I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask you for reconsideration of that bill, but I would ask you going forward to take that into consideration. And likewise on this particular bill, 0.5 or 0.6, again, the legislature does an extraordinary job and works long hours and sometimes at personal risk to their own health. I know we can all think of examples where legislators have suffered health consequences, perhaps not directly because of their service, but coincidental with their service. I believe that you deserve it, and I believe everybody in this state deserves health care and coverage, and of course, that's what we advocate at the Healthy Wyoming Coalition. So it would be a little bit disingenuous of me to say, you know, no health care for legislators, but urge upon you health care for our citizens at large, those that are falling into a gap. So I ask you to, and I know you are, giving this bill serious consideration, and I hope I can open the hearts and minds of those maybe that aren't in this room to understand better that truly the legislature does need this kind of coverage. It will help all of us. It will make you healthier, and it will make our state healthier. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Garrett? Questions, committee? All right. Appreciate that, Mr. Garrett.
Thank
We're
you.
not going to go back, but I wanted to allow you time to speak to that anyway. Thank you for
Thank you,
speaking on
Mr.
this.
Chairman.
Thank you, sir. He has a point. This job consumes my life. All right. We are on 0.5. Is there a motion to move the bill?
Move 0.5.
Motion to move. Any seconds? Second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So one of the things that was emphasized in the commission legislation, which I think is important, is trying to have a legislature that is representative of the state and which provides access to all of the people of the state, so that anyone that wants to serve in the citizens legislature has the capacity to serve in the citizens legislature. I think one of the largest barriers to that is health insurance and the ability to afford health insurance if you're committing the amount of time that you have to commit to this legislature. I think we have a very deeply self-selected group of legislators that can afford to be in the legislature for one reason or another, and folks that have the wherewithal to provide themselves with, in one way or another, health insurance to be here. This is a barrier that is selective. I realize that it's a challenge, it's an uphill battle to pass something like this because we have a legislature that is deeply divisive and political when it comes to compensation. And we've seen that, as well as a legislature that is capable of being here. It's the, well, it works for me, so I don't see why we need to change anything algorithm, which we see a lot. So it might be an uphill battle, but this is empowering. If we were to pass this legislation, I think we would open the door to a lot of folks in Wyoming that previously couldn't serve and wouldn't even run for office. But with this legislation, that would potentially change. I think that's good for our state legislature. I think this bill's good for our state legislature. I don't know that it would make any difference in my world. I'm in the legislature and I can afford healthcare. But I do think it would be empowering for many. So I urge the Management Council to support this, and hopefully we can bring this version of it to the legislature that would be empowering.
Thank you, Senator. Did I hear the two down here? Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I support 0.6. I don't support 0.5. I think if we're going to do it, we should cover the premium. I do think some kind of health coverage is good. My wife and I have just went through trying to decide what to do as our premiums go to $3,300 a month, $40,000 a year at age 63. So I certainly understand the pressure it puts on your pocketbook and the decisions you have to make on health insurance. So I think it's a good thing. I just prefer 0.6, pay your own premium.
Understood. I see one other hand down here. Ms. Gray?
Well, in light of those, I'd urge a no. I'm going to vote against 0.6 as well for a variety of reasons, and maybe I'll make some comments there on the broad thing. But the conceptual issue here. But I just think this is way too far, and I'm going to be voting no. So thank you.
Let's double check with the sponsor. Anything else?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, on and in favor. I found really compelling at our last meeting, a testimony by a kind of a sitting legislator who kind of reminded the body who has health insurance in the legislature right now. And it would be kind of retirees, those who are self-employed and can continue with their health insurance, or those who are fortunate like me, who my employer covers health insurance while I'm serving. Who isn't covered are those who are still working, whose employers say, okay, you can serve in the legislature, but I'm taking you off of our payroll for that month or for that 2 months, right? Depending on budget or general session. So all of a sudden, we have someone in basic working years from 18 to 65, honestly, enormous age span, where they're electing to serve in the legislature, their employer can't keep them on the payroll, and all of a sudden, they lose their health insurance. Not only do they lose their wages, they lose their health insurance for that month or two. That could also go for their family. And they can't do that, right? Who can choose to do that? Not many people. So I found that testimony incredibly compelling in terms of, again, who we want in this body. And I think we want 18 to 65-year-olds who are working, right, who need to continue their health insurance. So I'm in favor of this bill. I hope we pass one of them. I prefer the 0.5 version because I honestly think we are an employer and that we should be covering the cost of health insurance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further discussion? And we took public comment on this. We're all ready for the vote. My wife threatens that I'm gone so much that she's going to take me off the payroll. So anyway, call the roll.
Mr. President, on 23 LSO-0316, Legislator Healthcare 2, version 0.5. Senator Driscoll.
Aye.
Senator Hicks is excused. Senator Nethercott. Senator Rothfuss. Representative Connolly. Representative Gray. Representative Greer is excused. Representative Summers. Speaker Barlow. President Dockstader. Mr. President, you have 5 ayes, 3 noes, and 2 excused.
Next one. Legislative Healthcare Act 2, Director first, then Representative Barlow. 0.6.
Mr. Chairman, I walked through this bill briefly before, but the main difference between 0.6 and 0.5 is that the legislator who elects coverage is responsible for the full cost of the premium selected.
Thank you. Representative Barlow, let's go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think based on, for that particular discussion, that was handled in '05, but for the discussion of whether some of the administrative issues, that is also in '06, it is not in '05. So we don't have to deal with it now, we can just let this bill lie and we can deal with it as it comes to the session. But I think, and there may be more discussion to be had with our executive branch partners on this, but so we don't have to take it up, but there will be some adjustments that I think need to be made if this bill, as this bill proceeds, if it proceeds in the session. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, do you want to note quickly any of those adjustments, or are you just good to go?
Mr. Speaker, I can note
Go ahead.
some. On the 0.6 version on page 4, starting on line 15, there's a clarification that a member of the legislature shall be deemed as a person employed on a regular half-time basis for purpose of obtaining and maintaining coverage under the group insurance plan administered by the department. LSO shall act as the enrolling agency for all legislators and their dependents who participate in the group insurance plan. And so I think, you know, with that, on a regular halftime basis, if you look at figure 2 on the handout, that determines what the contribution level will be. So, you know, it wouldn't be the full contribution, just the halftime contribution for a member, if that goes into the 0.5 version. And Mr. Chairman, the other change that was requested by EGI did not go in the 0.6 version because it didn't fit, and that is that LSO will be the agency that's responsible for the employer contribution.
Okay, thank you. Committee have any questions for the director on those? All right, any further comments from the committee? No further comments. Any public comment on 0.6 working draft? Any further comments? All right. Motion on the bill? Motion on the bill. Bill dies for lack of motion then. Okay. All right. Here's where we're at. It's 11:30. 33. Have we got all the folks here that need to be for the next? No, wait a minute. We got another prep salary for budget hearings. I looked right past that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, what this request is under Management Council policy, members of the Joint Appropriations Committee do not receive prep salary for the budget hearings. And this request is to provide prep salary for budget hearings at the same rate that prep salary is provided for a regular committee meeting. So a half day of prep for each day of a meeting.
All right. Just a note of observation then, or do you want something, an motion on it?
So moved.
Yeah, you actually need to change your policy on this.
Okay, this is
So
an effort to change policy. Committee, do you have questions for the director? Committee? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my apologies. I was having a side conversation. I need that repeated.
You bet.
Just
Under, Mr. Chairman, under your current policy, the budget hearings are excluded from prep salary. So the motion would be to include JAC members, to allow JAC members to receive prep salary at the same rate as other committee meetings. So right now, JAC members, well, as you know, do receive prep salary if they hold a meeting during the interim. You know, they receive a half-day prep for each day of a meeting, just like you do during the interim, but they don't receive anything for the budget hearings, which I think is, we all know that requires more prep than any other meeting. So, so that's was the request from some members of JAC to the legislative subcommittee, and then finally to council.
Mr. Chairman?
We got the speaker and then you, sir. Go ahead.
I was going to make a motion. If you have a comment, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I guess my inquiry is, standing committees are usually 1 or 2 day meetings, et cetera. Now we're talking about budget hearings, which is, I think, 7 to 14 days, depending on the structure in the past. And so we're talking about taking 0.5 of that, and that's prep days. So I just want to be clear that that's what we're talking about. If we have 10 days worth of meetings planned for December, which there may be 10 days worth of meetings by our JAC, they would get an additional 5 days worth of prep days accompanying that, and this would be effective December 1st if we make this motion, if there's a motion. Is that accurate?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Chairman,
Director?
Mr. Vice Chairman, that is accurate. And not only that, but it would also provide prep salary for incoming members who aren't even currently on the committee yet as well.
Thank you.
but we'll be sitting in during these budget hearings.
Well, we've got the director explaining. Any further questions on what we're doing here before we go to the motion? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a comment. I know while I served on appropriations, you can't imagine the amount of time you can because you
Yeah.
served on it. And so
Yeah.
the minority floor leader, but it takes an incredible amount of time. And so I certainly am going to support doing this.
Thank you. Any further questions? Are we ready for the motion then?
Mr. President, I would make a motion to approve the prep salary for Joint Appropriations Committee for the upcoming session and for the, those members that are going to be on the committee as well moving forward. And then I'd also ask that a revision to the policy be drawn up for a future Management Council's consideration.
Second, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This one is not an actual bill, so it's policy. We'll just have all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Policy change has been approved. Thank you, Director. Okay, folks, I think we're moving along here. If we've got all the people we need here for this next topic, Joint Agriculture, State Public Lands, Water Resources request for an additional meeting day, let's have, oh, they're driving down. Let's take a break. Let's take about a 15-minute break. Let everybody gather. It's an important topic. We've got people coming. Go ahead.
You know, I would ask, John Lehman and the whole Lehman family are driving down here. I mean, the agenda says 3 p.m. I mean, this is something they've been, talking about for 2 years. I would ask we, break for lunch, and then I think they'll be here.
Are we aware of anybody else that's making the drive in addition to the Lehman family?
I'm not sure. I do know the Lehman family's driving, and I do think they'll be here by 1, but, the agenda did say, 2:33 or something?
Right. We always note, though, that it's a flexible agenda to be here. All right, committee, let's go ahead and we are made aware that we've got people on the road driving here. Let's go ahead and take a lunch till 1. And go get some bills ready for the session. Come back at 1 o'clock, stand recess until 1 p.m.